Okay, ang pag-uusapan natin ngayon ay yung uniformly accelerated motion along horizontal. Okay? So ano ba yung tinatawag natin na uniformly accelerated motion? So uniformly accelerated motion is a type of motion in which the velocity change in a time at a constant acceleration. So halimbawa po ng mga uniformly accelerated motion ay yung mga skidding cars at yung mga free-falling bodies or free-falling object. And in dealing with uniformly accelerated motion, kailangan po ay familiar tayo sa apat na kinematic equation. Una, meron tayong velocity as a function of time. So that is final velocity is equal to initial velocity plus the product of acceleration and time. Next, we have position as a function of velocity and time. So that is final position is equal to 1/2 times initial velocity plus final velocity times time. And then we have final position as a function of time. So that is final position is equal to initial position plus the product of initial velocity and time plus 1/2 times acceleration times time squared. Next, we have velocity as a function of position. So that is final velocity squared is equal to initial velocity squared plus 2 times acceleration times displacement. So ito yung apat na kinematic equation na kailangan natin in dealing with uniformly accelerated motions. So let's try this problem. As an engineer, you were asked to design a runway for an airport. An airplane that will use this airfield must reach a speed of 30 meters per second before takeoff and should accelerate at 2.15 meters per second squared. First, how much time does it take this plane to reach the takeoff speed? So una, kailangan natin gawin is identify natin yung mga given quantities doon sa problem. So identify natin. Una, meron tayong initial velocity which is equal to 0 meter per second. And we also have a final velocity which is equal to 30 meter per second. And we have acceleration which is equal to 2.50 meter per second squared. And we are asked to calculate for the time. Next step ay i-identify natin kung alin sa apat na equation na ito ang kailangan nating gamitin. So tingnan natin kung alin sa apat na to yung makaka-satisfy dito sa given quantities natin. So check natin. So sa equation 1, meron siyang time. Sa equation 2, meron din siyang time. Sa equation 3, meron din siyang time. Sa equation 4, wala siyang time. So x na natin sa equation 4. Ibig sabihin, hindi ito yung gagamitin natin na equation. Next, tingnan natin yung given. Meron tayong initial velocity. So meron siyang initial velocity. Ito, meron ding initial velocity. Sa equation 3, meron din siyang initial velocity. So next, yung final velocity. Sa equation 1, may final velocity. Sa equation 2, may final velocity. And then, sa equation 3 ay may walang final velocity. So, scrap na din natin sa equation number 3. So, x na to. So, ang natitira na lang ay sa equation 1 at sa equation 2. So, equation 1, meron siyang acceleration. So, pasok. Sa equation 2, wala siyang acceleration. So, scrap na din natin siya. Ibig sabihin, hindi ito yung ating gagamitin. Meaning, sa equation 1, yung ating gagamitin na equation. So, that is, final velocity is equal to initial velocity plus the product of acceleration and time. Since time yung kailangan natin, so kailangan natin i-derive yung ating formula. So, ang gagawin natin, itatranspose natin si initial velocity. So, from positive, magiging negative siya. So, that is final velocity minus initial velocity is equal to the product of acceleration and time. And since time nga yung hinahanap natin, we need to divide both sides by acceleration. So, that is final velocity minus initial velocity divided by a is equal to 80 divided by a. And then, i-cancel natin si acceleration, parang matira lang ay si time. So time is equal to final velocity minus initial velocity over acceleration. Next, plug in the values. So that is 30 meter per second, which is your final velocity, minus 0 meter per second, which is your initial velocity, divided by your acceleration, which is 2.50 meter per second squared. So your time is equal to 12 seconds. Next, what must the minimum length of the runway for the aircraft to reach its speed? So we have the same given. Initial velocity is equal to 0 meter per second. Final velocity is equal to 30 meter per second. And your acceleration is equal to 2.50 meter per second squared. So this time, ang tinatanong sa atin is yung minimum length of the runway. So that is x. So ngayon, identify uli natin kung aling equation ang gagamitin natin. So hanapin natin lahat yung may x. So sa equation 1, wala siyang x. So scrap na natin. So x na to. So sa equation 2, meron siya. Sa equation 3, meron din siya. At sa equation 4, meron din siya. Next, tingnan natin yung given. So meron tayong initial velocity. Ito may initial velocity. Ito may initial velocity. Ito meron din siyang initial velocity. Next, we have final velocity. So sa equation 2, may final velocity. Sa equation 3, wala siyang final velocity. So scrap na natin siya. Sa equation 4, meron siyang final velocity. Next, we have acceleration. Sa equation 2, wala siyang acceleration. So, i-cancel na natin sa equation 2. Pero sa equation 4, meron din siyang acceleration. So, ibig sabihin, ang gagamitin natin ay sa equation 4. So, that is final velocity squared is equal to initial velocity squared plus 2 times acceleration and distance. So since distance yung kailangan natin kunin, so yung x natin, ito, kailangan natin itong equation na ito i-derive. So ililipat natin si initial velocity doon. So from positive, magiging negative siya. So that is final velocity minus initial velocity squared is equal to 2ax. And then i-divide natin both sides. So we have final velocity squared minus initial velocity squared divided by 2a is equal to 2ax divided by 2a. So makakancel po natin si 2a. Okay? So makakancel natin si 2a at ang matitira lang ay si x. Okay? So that is final velocity squared minus initial velocity squared over 2a is equal to x. Next, plug in the values. So we have 30 squared minus 0 meter per second squared divided by 2 times 2.50 meter per second squared. And the minimum length for the runway is equal to 180 meters.